Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Claire's hands trembled as she clutched the small envelope against her chest, tears streaming down her face, each one burning with a mixture of guilt, fear, and shame, because the truth she carried was heavier than anything she had ever faced in Genoa City. She had tried to bury it, to hide it behind polite smiles, casual conversations, and endless distractions, pretending to be the same Claire everyone thought they knew, the same woman who had navigated scandal after scandal with poise and strategy, but now the weight of the secret had finally broken through the fragile dam of her composure, and as she stood in the familiar yet suddenly suffocating walls of crimson lights, the chatter of oblivious patrons fading to an inconsequential hum, her mind raced through every single consequence of the revelation she was about to utter, because this was not just about a misstep or a fleeting moment of weakness, it was about a life, a baby who would grow up in a world where everyone she loved and trusted could potentially turn against her. And as she sank onto the worn leather bench, shaking uncontrollably, the door swung open and Kyle stepped in, his brow furrowed, his eyes immediately locking onto hers with a mixture of curiosity and concern, because he could feel, without a word being spoken, that something in Claire's aura had shifted, that the usual confidence, the carefully constructed mask of calm, had crumbled, leaving raw vulnerability exposed for the first time in years. And Holden followed shortly after, his face etched with worry and suspicion, sensing the tension before understanding it, a silent question burning in his gaze as he approached, trying to bridge the chasm of dread that Claire had unwittingly opened in that small, dimly lit cafe. And then in a voice barely above a whisper, choking on the weight of her own words, Claire said it, the three most devastating words that could shatter the fragile equilibrium of everyone present. It's not. Her breath caught, tears making it impossible to continue, and as she looked from Kyle to Holden, both men frozen in disbelief, hearts pounding with a mix of confusion, anger, and protectiveness, she broke down completely, burying her face in her hands and shaking as the truth spilled out. It's not yours. Neither of yours. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by her hiccuping sobs and the distant clink of coffee cups in the background, and in that moment, the reality of the situation hit like a sledgehammer. Alliances would crumble, secrets would erupt into public spectacle, and every relationship in her carefully curated life would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine, because the man who was truly the father was a shadow from the past, someone whose involvement with Claire had been hidden, dismissed, and now, unexpectedly, forced into the light, and as she tried to explain, voice trembling, hands gesturing helplessly, fragments of the story tumbled out in a torrent of emotion, detailing nights of vulnerability, moments of unguarded intimacy, and the impossible choice she had made to protect not just herself but the people she loved from a truth that could destroy them. And Kyle, usually the embodiment of composure and measured response, felt a rage he could barely contain. His jaw tightening, fists clenching as the betrayal, real or perceived, hit him like a physical blow, while Holden's initial shock gave way to a fierce protective instinct, his mind racing through every possible scenario, every way to shield Claire and the baby from the fallout he could already sense was inevitable, and outside, Genoa City seemed oblivious to the storm that had erupted within those walls, the normal rhythms of life continuing as if nothing of consequence had occurred. Yet inside, the very fabric of trust, love, and family was being unraveled strand by delicate strand, because secrets, once exposed, refused to be contained, and Claire's confession was not merely a revelation of paternity, but a seismic shift that threatened to redefine every relationship, every alliance, and every sense of identity in her world. And as she finally managed to lift her tear-streaked face, staring directly at the two men who had meant so much to her, she felt the crushing weight of expectation, judgment, and fear pressing down, knowing that the reaction she would receive, the anger, the heartbreak, and possibly the fury, were all inevitable, because the nature of human emotion, especially in a place like Genoa City, is volatile and unforgiving. And as Kyle's eyes narrowed, a storm of betrayal and confusion reflecting in their depths, Holden stepped closer, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder in a gesture of support that seemed almost alien to his normally stoic demeanor. And Claire, trembling under the intensity of their scrutiny, felt both relief and renewed anxiety, because in admitting the truth, she had set in motion a chain of events that could never be reversed, and already, in the echo of her own admission, She could sense the ripple effects spreading through the lives of those she cared for most, threatening friendships, romances, and loyalties, because the true father was someone whose arrival would not only complicate the lives of Kyle, Holden, and herself, but would intersect with the ambitions, secrets, and vendettas of other key players in Genoa City, each of whom would seize the opportunity to manipulate, judge, or exploit the situation for their own ends. And as Claire tried to gather her scattered thoughts, the words refusing to form coherently in her panicked mind, she realized that this confession was not merely about revealing a biological truth, but about confronting the consequences of past decisions, the inevitability of secrets unmasked, and the fragility of trust in a world where every action, every glance, and every whispered conversation carries the potential to ignite chaos. And as the sobs subsided just enough to allow her to speak again, fragments of her story spilled out, tangled with emotion, shame, and raw honesty, painting a portrait of vulnerability that left both Kyle and Holden struggling to reconcile their own feelings of betrayal with the love and care they felt for her. And in that chaotic maelstrom of emotion, Claire finally named the man whose DNA was intertwined with her child's future, a name that landed like a thunderclap in the room, sending shockwaves through the fragile structures of loyalty, expectation, and desire that had previously defined their relationships. And as silence fell once more, heavy and suffocating, each of them began to grapple with the implications, the hidden histories, and the decisions that would inevitably follow, knowing that nothing in Genoa City would ever be the same again. The weight of Claire's revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud threatening to break at any moment, and as Kyle took a slow, trembling step backward, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief, hurt, and confusion, he struggled to reconcile the image of the woman he thought he knew with the layers of secrecy and deception that had just been laid bare before him, because every memory, every shared laugh, every fleeting moment of intimacy suddenly seemed tainted by the possibility that he had been living in an illusion carefully constructed by Claire. And yet, beneath the sting of betrayal, there was an undeniable, almost primal urge to protect her, to understand her, and to somehow navigate this labyrinth of tangled truths and lies, because even though her admission cut deeper than any knife, he could not bring himself to abandon her completely, even as his heart ached with the realization that someone else, someone entirely unexpected, now held the key to a future he had imagined as belonging to him alone. And Holden, watching from just a step away, felt his own world tilt violently on its axis, the steady certainty he had clung to as a foundation for his decisions, his relationships, and his moral compass suddenly splintering into fragments too numerous and sharp to grasp all at once, because Holden had always prided himself on his ability to remain calm, to assess the situation rationally, and to act with calculated precision. But Claire's tears, her trembling voice, and the sheer weight of the secret she carried rendered every principle he had ever known irrelevant in the face of raw human vulnerability. And as he reached instinctively toward her, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder, he felt the frailty of her body beneath his touch, the quivering of her muscles echoing the seismic tremor of emotions that rippled through the room, while outside, the steady rhythm of Genoa City life continued obliviously, as if the universe itself were indifferent to the personal catastrophe unfolding within those walls. And yet every sound, every glance, and every breath seemed amplified in the small, tension-filled space, each moment stretching infinitely, as though time itself had slowed to allow the full impact of Claire's confession to settle into the bones of everyone present. She lifted her head, wiping tears from her cheeks, and met Kyle's gaze with a vulnerability so raw that it threatened to undo the very fabric of her carefully constructed life. She wanted him to understand that her silence had never been born from malice, that every decision she had made, every lie she had told, had been fueled by a desire to protect, to shield, to preserve a fragile balance that had always seemed just within reach. Yet now, in the bright light of revelation, it was clear that balance had been an illusion, and the consequences of her actions would cascade far beyond the confines of crimson lights, touching every life in ways she could scarcely predict. Because Genoa City had a way of turning private heartbreak into public spectacle, of transforming secrets into weapons, and as she tried to continue, voice breaking under the weight of emotion, fragments of the story tumbled forth in jagged, uneven pieces. Nights of vulnerability, moments of unguarded passion, choices made under duress, and a desperate attempt to protect everyone she cared for from the chaos that would inevitably follow the truth. Kyle's lips pressed into a thin line as he listened, anger simmering beneath the surface, threatening to explode in a torrent of words and accusations, but he restrained himself, knowing that Claire's vulnerability demanded patience, empathy, and a careful balance between confrontation and compassion, because any rash move, any misstep, could destroy the fragile remnants of trust that still clung tenuously to the edges of their relationship. And yet the knowledge that another man, someone unknown, perhaps even dangerous, was now intricately entwined in their lives made it impossible to quell the storm of protective instinct, jealousy, and fear that coursed through him with every heartbeat, because love, betrayal, and uncertainty were inextricably intertwined in a tangle that seemed impossible to unravel. Holden, meanwhile, felt a different kind of fury, one that was quieter but no less intense, a steady, simmering force that threatened to boil over at the slightest provocation, because his mind raced ahead, calculating the potential ramifications of Claire's admission, the legal implications, the fallout among friends and family, the ways in which the truth could be weaponized by rivals, enemies, and opportunists lurking in the shadows of Genoa City, each ready to seize upon a moment of weakness and turn it into leverage, humiliation, or profit. And as he considered the baby, the innocence at the center of this storm, a protective rage surged through him, fueled by the awareness that this child, entirely innocent of the chaos surrounding it, deserved safety, stability, and love, regardless of the circumstances of conception. Yet the truth of paternity introduced uncertainty, a complication that could ripple outward with unforeseen consequences, disrupting lives, alliances, and even the fragile equilibrium of the city itself. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she recounted, between sobs, the tangled series of events that had led to this moment, the fleeting encounters, the clandestine meetings, the stolen glances, and the whispered promises that had culminated in a secret she had carried alone for months, because the fear of judgment, the dread of losing the people she loved, and the knowledge of the havoc her confession could wreak had paralyzed her into silence. And now, finally, as the words spilled from her lips, she felt a mixture of relief and terror, knowing that while the truth could no longer be contained, the reactions of Kyle, Holden, and the man she had yet to name would shape the next chapter of her life, the lives of those she loved, and the future of her child, who remained blissfully unaware of the storm surrounding them. Kyle's hands shook, his mind a cacophony of conflicting emotions, because he loved Claire, yet he could not ignore the pain of betrayal, the questions that now haunted every memory and every interaction they had shared. And as he struggled to articulate his feelings, the words refused to form, leaving him paralyzed in the face of a revelation that seemed both impossible and inevitable, while Holden's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering, his eyes reflecting the protective determination of a man who would stop at nothing to ensure the safety and well-being of both mother and child, even as the intricate web of secrets and deceit threatened to ensnare them all. And the three of them remained suspended in that moment, each grappling with the enormity of what had just been revealed, the silence punctuated only by Claire's sobs, the occasional cough of a nearby patron, and the distant hum of the city beyond the cafe's walls, a stark reminder that life would continue to move forward, indifferent to the personal chaos unfolding within. Finally she whispered the name, the one that would change everything, a name that landed with a weight heavier than any accusation or betrayal. The true father. The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening with tension as Kyle and Holden absorbed the shock, their minds racing to comprehend the implications, the ripple effects that would inevitably follow, because in Genoa City, no secret remained buried for long, and the revelation of paternity was not merely a personal matter, but a catalyst for drama, conflict, and upheaval that would reach far beyond the walls of Crimson Lights. As the truth settled, Claire felt a strange mix of liberation and dread, because the burden she had carried alone for so long was now shared. Yet the consequences of sharing it could be catastrophic, altering relationships, alliances, and perceptions in ways she could scarcely imagine. And as she looked from Kyle to Holden, she realized that nothing in her world would ever be the same again, that every interaction, every choice, and every relationship would now be filtered through the lens of this revelation, and she could only hope that love, loyalty, and compassion would prevail in the aftermath of the storm she had unleashed, because in Genoa City, the line between truth and betrayal is always razor thin, and one secret can ignite a fire that consumes everything in its path. Even as the echoes of her confession reverberated through the small cafe, the consequences had already begun to take shape. Whispers behind closed doors, subtle glances, strategic alliances being reconsidered, and the shadow of the true father looming over every decision, every conversation, every encounter. Because in a city built on ambition, power, and secrets, knowledge is both a weapon and a curse. And the revelation of paternity was the spark that would ignite the next series of battles, heartbreaks and revelations, each more intense than the last, as Kyle, Holden, and Claire, and the baby at the center of it all, navigated the treacherous waters of love, loyalty, and truth, knowing that the choices they made in the coming days, weeks, and months would shape not just their own futures, but the future of the entire city. And as Claire wiped the last of her tears, feeling the tremors of exhaustion, fear, and hope, she understood that the only path forward was one of honesty, courage, and resilience, because the truth, once revealed, demands reckoning, and in Genoa City, there is no escaping the consequences of the secrets we keep, the lies we tell, or the truths we finally confess. And yet, even as the initial shock began to settle into a dull, aching reality, the room felt impossibly small, claustrophobic, every glance and movement amplified in a way that made breathing feel like a conscious, labored effort, because the truth Claire had just confessed was not simply about biology, about who carried which DNA. It was a revelation that cut to the very core of identity, loyalty, and trust, and Kyle, holding himself upright with the effort of sheer willpower, could feel the tension radiating off Claire in waves, each tremor of her body a silent testament to the immense burden she had borne in silence for months, and his own heart twisted with a contradictory mix of empathy, heartbreak, and confusion, because he loved her and had envisioned a future that now seemed irrevocably shattered. Yet at the same time, he could not ignore the insidious questions that now plagued his mind, the what-ifs and whys that gnawed at the edges of his understanding, as though the very foundation of his relationship with Claire had been built on a fragile illusion, and every memory, every shared laugh, every whispered conversation seemed suddenly recontextualized under the harsh glare of the truth, leaving him teetering on the precipice of despair and fury, unsure whether to lash out, withdraw, or hold her close in a desperate attempt to cling to the fragments of trust that still remained, while Holden, standing a few paces away, felt a different kind of storm brewing. Inside him, one that was quieter, simmering beneath the surface, but no less destructive, because his mind raced through every potential scenario, every way the truth could unravel the delicate fabric of relationships in Genoa City, every way in which enemies, opportunists, and even friends might seize upon this revelation to manipulate, humiliate, or gain advantage. And as he watched Claire, broken and trembling, he felt the protective instinct rise in him like a tidal wave, an unrelenting force that refused to be contained, demanding that he do everything in his power to shield her and the child from the fallout, even if it meant sacrificing his own pride, composure, or sense of control, because in moments like this, logic often yields to the raw force of human emotion, and Holden knew that the storm that had been unleashed would not be weathered easily, that it would leave scars, emotional, relational, and perhaps even physical, that would linger long after the initial confession faded from memory. And yet, amidst the chaos, Claire herself felt a strange sense of liberation, a fragile glimmer of hope that the truth, however devastating, might allow her to finally breathe, to stop carrying the crushing weight of secrecy, to begin navigating a future defined by honesty, resilience, and the unvarnished reality of human imperfection, even as she feared the reactions, the judgments, and the potentially catastrophic consequences of naming the true father, a figure whose arrival into the narrative would complicate, challenge, and destabilize the already fragile ecosystem of loyalties, romances, and rivalries that defined the lives of everyone in her orbit. Every heartbeat seemed deafening, echoing in the spaces between them, each one a reminder that life in Genoa City never paused, never waited for grief, shock, or revelation, and as the seconds stretched into minutes, Kyle felt a sudden, almost involuntary surge of anger, sharp and biting, because love, betrayal, and uncertainty had collided in a way that made reason almost impossible, while Holden's expression, carefully measured yet impossible to conceal entirely, reflected a complex web of emotions. Empathy for Claire, concern for the baby, frustration with the secrets that had led them here, and an almost palpable determination to navigate the consequences with courage, dignity, and strategic foresight, because survival in Genoa City demanded a delicate balance of heart and mind, and a misstep could have ramifications that echoed far beyond a single family, relationship, or revelation, rippling outward to touch friends, enemies, and strangers alike. Claire's trembling hands unconsciously reached toward the envelope she had clutched like a lifeline, a physical manifestation of the truth she had finally unleashed, and as she pressed it to her chest, she felt the enormity of the moment settle like a stone in her stomach, heavy, unrelenting, unavoidable, and yet necessary because living a lie, even one intended to protect, was no longer sustainable, and the cost of silence had become too great, leaving her with no choice but to confront the chaos she had so long avoided, to stare into the faces of Kyle and Holden and own the consequences of her past choices, to name the man who now held the genetic key to her child's identity, and in doing so to redefine every relationship, every expectation, and every future that had once seemed secure. The revelation once spoken seemed to hang in the air, suspended between them like an invisible, unyielding barrier, making movement, speech, and even thought feel impossible, because each person present understood that nothing could ever return to the way it had been, that the fragile constructs of trust, loyalty, and certainty had been irreparably fractured, and that the man whose name had been revealed was no longer a distant shadow but an active, undeniable force whose presence would shape the choices, emotions, and alliances of everyone involved. And as Claire's sobs subsided just enough to allow her to breathe, the silence that followed was both oppressive and profound, a momentary pause in which the full weight of the revelation was absorbed, processed, and feared, because in Genoa City, silence is never neutral, never innocent. It is pregnant with expectation, consequence, and the knowledge that actions taken in the next moments could ignite a chain reaction that would reverberate for years to come. Kyle's jaw clenched, hands trembling at his sides, as he struggled to articulate the torrent of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Love, betrayal, fear, protectiveness, and a desperate need to understand, to reconcile the woman he loved with the impossible truth she had just revealed, while Holden's stance, measured yet undeniably tense, conveyed the same inner conflict, tempered by the instinctual drive to protect and strategize, to anticipate the ways in which this revelation could be weaponized, misinterpreted, or exploited, because in a city like Genoa City, information is power, and the disclosure of paternity is more than a private matter. It is a declaration that ripples outward, shaping perceptions, alliances, and the delicate balance of influence among the city's residents, each of whom will respond in ways both expected and unpredictable, based on desire, ambition, loyalty, and past grievances. And as the three of them sat, suspended in that fragile, tension-filled space, each realized that the true journey was only just beginning. Navigating a path defined by raw honesty, emotional vulnerability, and the impossible task of reconciling love, trust, and family in the aftermath of a revelation that could change everything. And even as the world outside continued its indifferent rhythm, the storm inside Claire's heart, and in the hearts of Kyle and Holden, raged with a force that threatened to engulf them all, because the truth, once revealed, cannot be contained, the past cannot be erased, and the future will be shaped irrevocably by the decisions, reactions, and emotions that follow, leaving every character teetering on the edge of heartbreak, hope, and chaos. And in that endless, unrelenting tension, Claire understood that while the confession had been necessary, it had only just begun to unravel the complex, fragile, and dangerous tapestry of lives, love, and secrets that define Genoa City, because in a world built on ambition, desire, and betrayal, there is no solace in truth, only the relentless, thrilling, and terrifying reality that every choice has consequences, every secret carries weight, and every revelation reshapes the landscape of the heart, the mind, and the soul, leaving no one untouched, no one unscathed, and no relationship untested.